1950s society. During the 1950s, we're going to see new ideals when it comes to the family. The thing is, with all of the prosperity of this decade, this basically meant children a lot of times could actually finish school. And this meant a lot of times young adults might be able to marry right after high school as well. Women in particular are going to face strong social pressure to basically pursue a husband, not a career. A lot of women who did go to college, it was more for anything else. Their MRS degree, or the ring on their finger, is the idea. And it wasn't just women facing this pressure. In fact, a lot of single young men were suspect because there was this concern about latent homosexuality. So young people got married quickly, and then they'd go on to have an average of 3 children spaced closely together. And this is once again adding to the number of baby boomers. We're going to see also family activities start replacing, like the street corner for kids and the neighborhood tavern for men. And a lot of this is because of the television. By 1960, we're going to see 87% of households have their own television set. And I want you to think about that. How many people today do you know that don't have a television at all? So before this, when we look at like popular entertainment, a lot of times it was like communal activity. As a group, maybe you and your friends would go to the movies or go cheer on a baseball team, etc. But now you have the TV in your own household, and that brings the entertainment home to people. Plus, TV programming is up for grabs during the 1950s. So we're going to have things like morning talk shows, quiz shows, lots of puppet shows, mostly because they were really cheap to produce. People are going to recycle like old vaudeville formats and make shows that way. You get soap operas, 15-minute newscasts, Saturday morning adventure shows that were adapted almost quite literally straight from the radio. The most successful of all of these shows, though, is going to be your situational comedies, your sitcoms. Basically, let's resolve a problem within half an hour in a specific type of setting. Most of the time, these characters are going to be like from middle class mainstream America. And it's very much depicting like the ideals of family togetherness. Most of the time they are white, they're polite, and they're happy. We're also going to see women affected in the 50s by the fact that basically we're extending that stay-at-home trend from the post-war years. Women during the 50s are going to give up some of their educational gains. Their share of like new college degrees and professional jobs are actually going to fall during this time. Whereas if you look at the average amount of time they spend on housework, that definitely increases. And so we're seeing these very distinct roles of what the mom is supposed to do versus what the dad is supposed to do. So mom and women are supposed to find, all their fulfillment in scrubbing their house and taking care of their children. But as much as that was the idea in the 50s, a lot of families' prosperity still depended on the earnings of women. In fact, the number of working women are going to reach new heights. And by 1960, we're going to see about 35% of women are holding jobs, and a lot of them were mothers. We're also going to see in the 1950s the invention of the teenager, basically. So what happens is teens are going to join adults as consumers. They go to different kinds of movies. They wear different kinds of clothes. They want to drive different kinds of cars. And advertisers pick up on this, and they want to promote this youth culture. We're going to see when it comes to schools, a lot of times they would match a certain type of school to the social status of a student. So like, for instance, if you are middle class and white, most likely your curriculum is going to include things like college prep material. Whereas anyone who they view as being a future factory worker, no, they're going to really push like vocational and technical schools on them. And then, of course, minorities like African Americans and Latinos would have to be in their own separate school completely. Schools basically were a training ground for students for specific roles in their future. However, as much as this separates a lot of teenagers, all teenagers still have this so-called youth culture and share things like their love of rock and roll, the new music of the 1950s. The thing is, rock and roll had been literally adapted from black urban rhythm and blues, but it was then made more mainstream for a white mass market. So of course, record producers are going to play up this association between like rock music and youthful rebellion. You get individuals like Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock and Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. The thing is, with this having a background from an African American tradition, this is actually going to allow certain black performers like Chuck Berry and Ray Charles, they're going to cross over into more mainstream pop music. Now, the only reason this was really possible, though, was because kids, or really teenagers, could listen to music separately from their parents because of things like the car radio or a portable phonograph and such. And so therefore they can have a separate market when it comes to music for like teenagers versus adults. We're going to see, though, there is a backlash against some of this rock and roll and everything. The rebellious lyrics made a lot of adult authorities feel like they needed to emphasize like social conformity. And in fact, this is when you see a lot of like dress codes go into effect. And you get like campaigns against what they saw as sinful comic books and such. And there was these worries about juvenile delinquency. We're also going to see religion play a part in all of this. Partly because there was this idea of pushing it back against the rebellion, but also this ties into the Cold War. Leaders like Eisenhower advocated church-going actually as an antidote for communism. And so we actually see regular church attendance grow from 1940 through 1960. And in fact, our Congress is going to create all kinds of new connections between religion and government during the 50s. Things like they added under God, that specific line, to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. So that wasn't there from the very beginning. That wasn't added until 1954. Making currency bear the phrase, "In God We Trust," that was started in 1955. We're also going to get things like radio and TV preachers. We get a revitalized evangelical and fundamentalist church at this time period. However, as much as you're seeing kind of this ramping up of religion within the American mindset, there's also going to be certain boundaries that are coming down, specifically boundaries between a lot of the different types of Protestant denominations, because these church leaders are really going to emphasize like a national unity. So it's less about, oh, you're Methodist or Baptist, and more about you're Protestant, and more so than that, you're an American. The same time that we're seeing more and more connection between the church and state on some level, we're also seeing the Supreme Court has some cases in the 60s that are doing the opposite. So we get like in 1962, the Supreme Court case of Engel v. Vitale, the court is going to rule that public schools could not require children to start the school day with group prayer. They can have things like moment of silences, because then a student can choose to pray or not, but they can't require the students to pray. We also get another Supreme Court case in 1963, which is like Abington Township v. Schnepp, and that's going to prohibit devotional Bible readings in schools. The idea is, once again, you have freedom of religion, so if you're forcing everyone to read from the Bible, then that's not really being freedom of religion. Of course, these Supreme Court cases are going to alarm evangelicals. However, if you are really looking for what is the big story of the 1950s, most likely that would be the lack of economic hardship. The thing is, during this time period, we're seeing a lot of production and consumption. And in fact, when you're looking at America's message to the world, these ideas of production and consumption outweighed the message of democracy. Americans are going to argue that, oh, their abundance and their economic prosperity was really a natural byproduct of them being in a free society. They're going to argue that choice is really the most important thing. Choice being like you get to choose from different types of cars, washing machines, etc., etc. However, as much as you have this affluence during this time period, there is still going to be vast inequalities. It's just a lot of times the poor were basically walled off and people didn't necessarily see them. Certain places, it would be in like really urban areas and really rural backwater areas. We're also seeing an increasing dissatisfaction amongst women in particular. They're going to face a lot of conflicting images of what is the so-called perfect woman when watching the media. On one side, you get like housework and cooking is made easy with individuals like the fictional Betty Crocker pictured here on the left. But on the other side, you have sultry sexpots like Marilyn Monroe and the Playboy bunny magazines and everything. This means a lot of women have a personal dissatisfaction during this time, especially when they were expected to find total satisfaction in basically taking care of children, cooking, and cleaning. So, what is the best thing about the 50s and what is the worst thing?